Hi, I'm Matthew, and welcome back to Dark Ascent. I'll be bringing you some stories of Karens who tried to conquer Everest with confidence and impatience, from a climber who pushed ahead of acclimatization despite clear signs of altitude sickness, to another who fatally unclipped from fixed ropes on a narrow ice ledge to bypass slower climbers. It was May 18th, 2014, on Mount Everest's northeast ridge. The summit push was underway, with climbers moving slowly above 26,000 feet, where the air holds only a fraction of the oxygen found at sea level. Conditions were already shifting as the climbing window narrowed near the end of the season. Melissa Granger, 42, worked as a pharmaceutical sales director in Phoenix, Arizona. She had climbed a few 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado, but had no experience at extreme altitude. After receiving a large bonus at work, she booked a commercial Everest expedition. She treated the climb like a reward and often reminded others how much she had paid to be there. During the early stages of the expedition, she questioned instructions, complained about delays, and showed little trust in the guides. I noticed early on that Melissa didn't treat the climb like something dangerous. She treated it more like a service she had paid for. 3 days before the summit push, the expedition leader explained strict turnaround rules. A storm system was expected, and everyone needed to descend by early afternoon, no matter how close they were to the top. These rules were not optional. Melissa reacted negatively. She complained that the limit was too strict and suggested the team was being overly cautious. Even then, it was clear she was thinking about reaching the summit more than getting back safely. On summit day, conditions were already getting worse. Winds were picking up, and visibility was starting to drop. Melissa climbed with her guide through the night, but she moved slower than expected. By early afternoon, she was still below the summit. From what I could tell, she was already behind schedule, but she kept pushing like it didn't matter. At that point, her guide told her they needed to turn back. The weather was closing in and continuing would be dangerous. Melissa refused. She argued, saying she was too close to stop. The discussion lasted several minutes, costing valuable time. Eventually, she made her decision. She unclipped from the safety line and continued climbing alone. That moment stood out to me. It wasn't just a bad choice. It was a complete rejection of the only system keeping her alive up there. The storm arrived soon after. Winds increased sharply, and visibility dropped to almost nothing, making it difficult to see even a few feet ahead. Temperatures fell fast, sapping strength, and making every movement more exhausting. Melissa continued upward and likely reached very close to the summit, but her oxygen supply had been calculated for a safe turnaround time. By staying longer, she used more than planned, and each step became harder as fatigue and the thin air took their toll. During the descent, things went wrong quickly. Without her guide, she had no clear direction. In poor visibility, it was easy to drift off route, and at that altitude, even simple navigation becomes challenging. Climbers nearby later reported seeing someone matching her description, moving unsteadily along the ridge, struggling to stay on the narrow path while exhaustion and low oxygen overwhelmed her body. This part is where everything stacks up at once. Low oxygen, exhaustion, cold, and confusion all hit together. Melissa eventually collapsed just below the summit ridge, completely exhausted and unable to continue. Her oxygen supply was spent, and her body could no longer handle the extreme altitude, bitter cold and thin air. Every step had become a struggle, and the storm overhead reduced visibility to almost nothing. By the time the weather eased, it was already too late for help to reach her. Rescuers found her the next day, near the route, but far enough that self-recovery had been impossible. The official cause of death was hypoxia, exposure, and exhaustion, with records confirming the storm had arrived as predicted. Looking back, her death felt preventable. The plan and turnaround times had been clear, yet she chose to push on despite the obvious risks. From how it played out, it felt preventable since the plan and timing were already clear, but she chose to ignore them. The incident received little media attention, briefly noted as a climbing fatality, and while her family later pursued legal action, it did not change the outcome. Ultimately, the mountain responds only to careful decisions and respect for its limits, not to confidence, money, or determination. It was April 14th, 2015, at Mount Everest Base Camp in Mount Everest, Nepal. The spring climbing season was just beginning, and teams were preparing for the long acclimatization process before any summit attempt. Zeal Zilinske, 50, worked as a senior vice president of operations for a multinational company based in Miami, Florida. She had climbed peaks like Mount Rainier and Denali, but she had never stayed above 20,000 feet for long periods. After receiving a promotion, she booked the Everest expedition and treated it like a goal she needed to complete efficiently. Early on, she showed frustration with the pace, often questioning the schedule and pushing for things to move faster. She treated the climb more like a project deadline than something that required patience. From what I saw, she didn't like slowing down, even when it was clearly necessary. During the initial briefing, the lead guide explained that the team would spend weeks rotating between camps before attempting the summit. The plan was standard and based on years of experience. Zeal questioned the schedule almost immediately. She suggested it could be shortened and made it clear she believed she could handle more than what was planned. By the second week, her frustration had grown. On day 8, she pushed to skip a scheduled rotation and rest period. She said she already felt adjusted and did not see the point of repeating climbs. Guides warned her that acclimatization does not work that way, but she continued to argue. She even tried to convince others to follow her plan. At that point, it was obvious she was relying too much on confidence and not enough on how the body actually reacts up there. Ignoring the planned schedule, Zeal moved ahead with 2 other climbers and went directly to Camp 2 at over 21,000 feet. Not long after arriving, she began showing early signs of altitude sickness. She had persistent headaches, felt nauseated, and lost her appetite, but she brushed it off and kept acting as if nothing was wrong, insisting she was fine. That same night, her condition took a serious turn. Her breathing became uneven and labored, making it hard for her to lie flat or get any real rest. Those around her noticed she was struggling, but she dismissed the warning signs and kept moving, trying to organize her gear and plan the next ascent. I could tell this was the moment when turning back could have saved her, yet she pressed on as if sheer willpower could override the limits of the mountain. By morning, her state had become critical. She was disoriented, confused, and unable to focus on even simple tasks. Shortly after, she lost consciousness entirely. Emergency oxygen was administered, but at that point, it was too late. The rapid ascent and extreme altitude had already overwhelmed her body, leaving it unable to recover. The team immediately began bringing her down the mountain. At high altitude, descending is the only real treatment for this kind of condition. However, the delay had already made things worse. Her body had not adjusted properly, and the rapid ascent had pushed it too far. During the descent, her condition kept worsening. She never regained full consciousness and died before reaching a lower altitude where medical treatment could have made a difference. The official cause of death was high-altitude cerebral edema, resulting from ascending too quickly without proper acclimatization. Medical examinations later confirmed that her brain had swollen significantly, with abnormal fluid buildup throughout the cranial cavity, both classic and dangerous signs of advanced altitude illness, showing just how severely her body had been affected by the rapid ascent and extreme elevation. From how it happened, it felt avoidable. The plan was already there, and the process was clear, but she chose to go against it. The incident received only brief coverage in local news and largely went unnoticed internationally. Her company issued a short statement, but no further public discussion followed. Later, medical experts cited her case as a clear example of why altitude acclimatization cannot be rushed. In the end, the mountain didn't bend to confidence, experience, or determination. It only responded to how carefully climbers respected the hard limits of the environment. It was May 11th, 2016, at Camp 4 on Mount Everest's South Col, where climbers prepare for the final push to the summit. At this altitude, around 26,000 feet, survival depends on careful planning, especially with oxygen use. Every step and every decision has to be controlled. Karen Coranzo, 47, owned a successful oil services company in Houston, Texas. She had climbed several of the 7 summits, but mostly on guided routes with less technical difficulty. Everest was different, but she approached it the same way she approached business. She often reminded others how much she paid for the expedition and expected better treatment because of it. During the climb, she complained about gear distribution and questioned why everything wasn't adjusted to her preference. I noticed she treated shared resources like they were personal upgrades instead of something everyone depended on. Before the summit push, Guides explained how the oxygen would be distributed. Each climber received enough for a planned ascent and descent, with emergency reserves stored separately. Karen immediately questioned her allocation. She argued that she should have more and pushed for extra bottles. When guides refused, she became frustrated and accused them of limiting her. Not long after, a disagreement started near the equipment area. Karen accused another climber of taking one of her oxygen bottles. The guides checked and confirmed that everything had been distributed correctly, but she did not accept that. The situation became tense, especially as climbers prepared to leave in the dark. It felt like she was more focused on getting what she wanted than understanding how the system actually worked. During the early hours of the ascent, Karen took an extra oxygen bottle that was meant for emergency use. She kept it and continued climbing. At the same time, she increased her oxygen flow rate above the recommended level. This made her feel stronger, but it also meant she was using her supply much faster than planned. As she climbed higher, everything seemed fine at first. She moved steadily, reaching key points ahead of schedule, and the extra oxygen made her feel strong and capable. But that boost came at a cost. Her supply was depleting faster than expected and was never intended to last the entire descent. By the time she reached the summit late in the morning, one bottle was nearly empty, leaving almost no margin for error. At 29,000 feet, even small delays became dangerous. Each breath demanded more effort, and fatigue began to make her movements sluggish and unsteady. On the descent, the situation deteriorated quickly. Her oxygen levels dropped at a critical pace, and her body started to shut down. Disorientation set in, and she struggled to maintain balance on the narrow, icy ridges, every step becoming riskier than the last. Her reaction slowed, making every step riskier. Nearby climbers tried to assist, offering oxygen or helping with footing, but the environment made sharing supplies difficult and dangerous. The combination of low oxygen, exhaustion, and exposure left her extremely vulnerable as she attempted to descend. From what I could tell, everything caught up to her right there. The extra oxygen earlier made her feel strong, but it left her with nothing when she actually needed it. Karen collapsed along the summit ridge, still attached to the fixed line. Without oxygen, her condition worsened rapidly. The extreme altitude made any rescue attempt difficult, and there were no extra supplies nearby to stabilize her. She died a few hours later, before help could reach her. Her body was found the next day, and her empty oxygen bottles confirmed what had happened. The cause of death was severe hypoxia and exposure, directly linked to how her oxygen was used during the climb. From how it played out, it felt preventable. The system was already in place, and the limits were clear, but she chose to work around them. The incident was reported as a shortage of oxygen during the climb, without much detail about the conflict beforehand. Her family later created a scholarship fund related to mountain safety, but the situation itself was not widely discussed. In the end, the mountain didn't adjust for expectations or status. It only responded to how well someone followed the rules that kept them alive. It was May 23, 2017, at the Hillary Step on Mount Everest's southeast ridge. This narrow section sits high above 28,000 feet and forces climbers to move one at a time. That morning, a long line had formed, with dozens of climbers waiting for their turn to pass through. Linda Carver, 39, worked as a social media influencer and fitness coach in Los Angeles, California. She had climbed several well-known peaks before, mostly documenting them for her online audience. Everest was her biggest project yet, and much of her climb was tied to sponsorships and content expectations. Throughout the expedition, she often focused on delays, posting about things slowing her down and getting in the way of her progress. From what I saw, she treated the climb like something she needed to capture and complete, not something that required slowing down and adjusting. The Hillary Step is one of the most technical parts of the route. Climbers rely on fixed ropes to get up safely, and there is no space for passing. Everyone has to wait, no matter their experience or fitness level. At that altitude, waiting itself becomes dangerous because it drains oxygen and energy. Before the summit push, guides made it clear that delays were likely and that patience would be necessary. Linda didn't take that well. She showed frustration early and pushed to move ahead of others. She believed she could get through faster and didn't see why she had to stay in line. By the time she reached the base of the Hillary Step, the line had already grown long. Climbers were moving slowly but steadily, Linda became increasingly impatient as the wait stretched on. She checked her phone, looked ahead repeatedly, and complained about how slow everything was moving. At that point, it was obvious she wasn't willing to wait, even though everyone else had no choice. After waiting for about 45 minutes, she lost patience and decided to take matters into her own hands. Rather than staying safely clipped into the fixed rope as everyone else was doing, she moved off the main route. She carefully stepped onto exposed terrain in an attempt to pass several climbers ahead of her, thinking she could move faster on her own. The area she entered was treacherous, completely unprotected, with loose rock underfoot and a sheer drop stretching thousands of feet below. Her guide immediately shouted for her to stop and return to the secured line, warning her of the extreme danger, but she ignored the instructions and continued onward, focused only on getting ahead. From where I stood, it looked rushed. She was trying to move quickly in a place where every step needs to be controlled. As she carefully made her way across the slope, her footing suddenly gave out. The loose rock beneath her crampons shifted unexpectedly, and with no rope attached to catch her, there was nothing to stop the fall. In a heartbeat, she slipped and began sliding uncontrollably down the steep ice and rock. The slope was far too steep to recover, and the icy surface offered no friction to slow her momentum. Within seconds, she was accelerating, moving dangerously close to the edge. Other climbers could only watch in horror as she disappeared from view almost instantly, helpless to reach her or intervene. The entire sequence happened so fast that there was no time to react. One single misstep and everything was gone. Rescue teams could not reach the area where she fell. The terrain below was too steep and broken, with deep crevasses making recovery impossible. Her body was never found. The cause of death was recorded as a fatal fall after leaving the secured climbing route. Her phone and camera were later recovered near the Hillary Step, confirming her position and timeline. From how it happened, it felt preventable. The route was clear, and the system was there for a reason, but she chose to go around it. The incident received wide media attention because of her online presence. Her last post focused on pushing limits and reaching the summit, but the situation on the mountain did not match that mindset. In the end, the conditions didn't adjust to urgency or pressure. They only responded to how carefully each step was taken. If you're finding these stories intense and want to hear more cases of climbers pushing their limits, make sure to hit subscribe. We've got more episodes coming with real-life lessons from the world's highest peaks. It was April 29th, 2018, during the traverse between Camp 2 and Camp 3 on Mount Everest's Lhotse face. The steep exposed route at 23,500 feet requires climbers to remain constantly attached to fixed safety lines installed by Sherpa teams. Every step demands focus, and the margin for error is nearly non-existent. Patricia Doyle, 55, worked as a project manager for a construction company in Newark, New Jersey. She had climbed multiple Adirondack peaks and attempted Denali twice, both cut short by bad weather. She joined the Everest expedition, thinking her lower altitude experience was enough, and she often complained that the ropes and strict rules felt like overkill. The Lhotse face rises 4,000 vertical feet above Camp 2, with ice slopes averaging 40 degrees and sections reaching 60 degrees. Fixed ropes installed annually provide the only protection against fatal falls into crevasses or off cliff faces. Climbing the face requires careful clipping and unclipping while using crampons and ice axes, a physically exhausting process even for experienced mountaineers. I remember thinking how exhausting it looked, even for people who followed every rule. During base camp briefings, Sherpa and Rita demonstrated proper fixed-line procedures and emphasized that failure to follow them could be fatal. Doyle participated, but dismissed the exercises as unnecessary. She argued that her experience allowed her to move safely without remaining attached at every step. I thought it was risky to watch someone so confident ignore advice that could save their life. On the morning of April 29th, teams began the traverse from Camp 2 toward Camp 3 across a particularly exposed section. The route narrowed to a ledge less than 2 feet wide at approximately 23,800 feet, with fixed anchors spaced 30 feet apart. Climbers ahead moved methodically, carefully clipping at each anchor while negotiating the wind-packed ice. Doyle grew visibly frustrated with the pace and repeated safety procedures. I could see her, impatience building, and part of me worried it would lead to a mistake. After waiting about 45 minutes, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She unclipped from the fixed line, determined to move past slower climbers and get back in control of her schedule. For the first 20 feet, she moved confidently, maintaining her balance and rhythm, appearing sure of every step. But at the narrowest point, her crampon struck a hidden patch of verglas, a thin, glossy sheet of ice over solid rock, and failed to grip. Her foot slid sideways, and without the security of the fixed rope, she lost balance instantly. I felt a chill run through me the moment I saw her slip. At that height, there was no way to stop a fall. Everything unfolded in seconds, and with sheer drops on both sides, there was no margin for error once momentum took over. Her initial sideways tumble quickly turned into a straight, uncontrolled slide down the 45-degree ice slope. Her ice axe was not positioned for self-arrest, leaving nothing to slow her rapid descent. Other climbers yelled warnings and desperately tried to throw ropes, but the combination of speed, steepness, and technical terrain made any rescue impossible. In moments, she vanished from view, illustrating just how unforgiving and immediate the consequences of one small misstep can be at extreme altitude. Within seconds, she disappeared from view, sliding toward a series of crevasses 2,000 feet below. I remember thinking that even the most experienced climbers have no margin for error here. It's unforgiving. Recovery teams located her body 3 days later in a crevasse system at 21,800 feet. The extreme terrain made the operation risky for the Sherpa rescuers. Her injuries were consistent with a high-speed impact from the fall, and the coroner determined that death had been instantaneous. Local newspapers in New Jersey reported the incident as "experienced climber dies on Everest," but they largely omitted the details about the safety violation that led to the fall. Her company later established a safety training fund in her memory. Watching the climb, it felt obvious that confidence earned at lower altitudes can become deadly overconfidence at extreme heights, where strict adherence to safety systems is the only protection. Even small lapses in judgment here can be fatal.